Before there was Motown, before there was Michael, there was Frankie, a brown-skinned boy from Harlem, barely 13, who sang about love before he ever had the chance to feel it. On a cold winter morning in 1956, radios across America played a new song, Why Do Fools Fall in Love? And for 3 minutes and 7 seconds, the world forgot about race, about war, about hate, and listened. That voice didn't sound like it belonged to a child. It was too smooth, too knowing, too human. They called him the Golden Throat, the first black teenage superstar. The boy who made grown women cry and white America lean closer to the sound of a Harlem dream. He was joy in motion, a spark in a country still divided by skin. His smile could light up a stage. His laugh could make even the coldest crowd clap along. But fame is a mirror that doesn't forgive. And the brighter the light, the darker the shadow behind it. Frankie Lymon would change the sound of youth forever, inspiring Diana Ross, Michael Jackson, Smokey Robinson, The Temptations, and every kid who ever wanted to sing their way out of the ghetto. But before long, the same world that fell in love with him would watch him fall apart. Because sometimes, the saddest songs are sung by those who made the world believe in happiness. Harlem, 1942. A city of jazz and sirens, of neon sins and Sunday prayers. That's where Frankie Lymon came into the world, a tiny cry wrapped in the noise of a neighborhood that never slept. His mother, Jeanette, cleaned floors for white families uptown. His father, Howard, drove a truck during the day and sang gospel at night. Together, they led a little church group called the Harlemers, where music wasn't just art, it was survival. And somewhere between the choir benches and the kitchen stove, a baby boy learned what salvation sounded like. Frankie was the youngest of 4, small, but sharp. He had eyes that asked too many questions, and a voice that didn't belong to his age. By 7, he could mimic his father's tone perfectly, singing hymns so pure that old women in church would whisper, "That boy's been here before." But the world outside those church walls wasn't holy. By 10, Frankie's parents had split. Rent was overdue, food was thin, and Harlem's streets were hungrier than the people walking them. He started working at the grocery store on the corner, ringing up milk and bread for customers twice his age. He delivered groceries during the day and watched life happen from doorsteps he could never enter. He learned early that childhood was a privilege the poor couldn't afford. While other boys played stickball and marbles, Frankie ran errands for men in suits and women in silk. He smoked his first cigarette at 10, his first joint before 11. And when older men came to Harlem looking for trouble and women to buy it from, Frankie, still a boy, became their go-between. He didn't understand what sin was. He just understood hunger. Still, every night, when the city lights dimmed and Harlem softened, he would sing. Sometimes from his window, sometimes in the hallway, his voice carrying like a prayer through thin apartment walls. And slowly, the block began to notice. Shop owners, cab drivers, even the cops on the corner, they'd say, "That Lymon boy can sing." Around the same time, 4 neighborhood kids, Jimmy Merchant, Sherman Garnes, Joe Negroni, and Herman Santiago, had a little group called the Coupe de Ville. They sang doo-wop under the street lamps, harmonizing to the hum of traffic. Frankie followed them everywhere, begging to join. They told him he was too young, too small, but he never stopped showing up. One night, at a school talent show, he sang alone. No microphone, no music, just that voice. The next morning, they let him in. They changed their name to the Premiers, then the Teenagers, and Harlem had its first taste of what was coming. In the basement of a church, in the hallway of a tenement, a legend was learning his first note. It started the way most miracles do, with noise. A handful of kids, barely old enough to shave, singing doo-wop on Harlem's street corners until the neighbors threw shoes at their windows. Their voices rose above the sound of buses, sirens, and arguments. 5 kids chasing a dream they didn't yet know had a name. Frankie was the youngest, the smallest, the loudest. He sang like he was trying to reach heaven before bedtime. Every night, he'd lead the group through another rehearsal, snapping fingers, clapping hands, reworking harmonies, until even the wind seemed to listen. One evening, their sound drifted through an open window and caught the ear of a man named Richard Barrett, the lead singer of the Valentines. He followed the music downstairs, and there, under the flicker of a street lamp, he found them a Puerto Rican and 4 black boys singing like angels with scuffed shoes. He smiled and said, "You kids got something." Barrett took them to George Goldner, a record executive who ran G Records. At first, Goldner wasn't impressed. Too young, too risky, too much trouble. But then Barrett pointed at the smallest boy. "Let him sing." Frankie stepped forward, 12 years old, brown skin glowing under the fluorescent light, his voice trembling for half a second before finding its wings. When he finished, Goldner didn't say a word. He just stood up and said, "Sign them, but make that boy the lead." They called themselves the Teenagers, and they began recording their first song, a melody born from a neighbor's old love letters titled "Why Do Birds Sing So Gay?" Frankie changed it, rewrote it, gave it rhythm. After 26 takes, the world had a new anthem. "Why Do Fools Fall in Love?" The 10th of January 1956, the song hit the radio. Number 1 on the R&B chart. Number 6 on Billboard Pop. Number 1 in the United Kingdom. The first American R&B song to ever do so. It was history. People didn't even believe it was sung by black kids. White teenagers heard it on the radio and thought it was a girl group. But when they appeared on TV, 5 boys in matching suits, spinning, smiling, perfect harmony, the world lost its breath. Frankie became the face of something new, the sound of youth itself. Michael Jackson, Smokey Robinson, Diana Ross, and the Jackson 5 would all one day call him their blueprint. He was the boy who made innocence sound like rebellion. Then came the tours, sharing stages with Little Richard, Chuck Berry, and the Platters. Every city screamed his name. Women threw flowers. Kids copied his moves. Even Nat King Cole held his daughter Natalie in his arms and whispered, "That boy's got it." But fame moves fast, and childhood moves faster. Frankie was only 14 when the world started calling him a man. He fell in love with Zola Taylor from the Platters, 19. Glamorous, dangerous. To him, she was proof that he had finally made it. To her, he was still a child, trying to wear a crown too heavy for his head. He wasn't just singing songs. He was singing a generation into existence. Success came fast. Too fast for any of them to understand. One day, they were Harlem kids singing under lamplight. The next, they were on tour buses, staying in motels where the sheets smelled like strangers and the lights never really turned off. The Teenagers were a phenomenon. But the world didn't see a group, it saw a face. Frankie's face. The baby smile, the smooth voice, the way he could walk onto a stage and make the crowd forget their own names. When the record label changed their name to Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers, it was meant to sell more records. But it sold something else too, their brotherhood. The others didn't say much, but you could feel it. The long silences on the bus, the way eyes stopped meeting. And Frankie, still barely 15, caught between loyalty and the world's applause, didn't know how to hold both. The money never reached them. Managers told them they'd get it later, that it was being saved in a trust fund until they turned 21. But when 21 came, there was only $1,700. Millions made. Pennies returned. It was the oldest story in black music genius stolen by paperwork. Their label owner, George Goldner, was deep in gambling debt. To pay it off, he sold his artists to Morris Levy, the most feared man in the record business. They called Levy the godfather of the music industry, a man with one hand in the charts and the other in the mob. Frankie didn't stand a chance. He was still a child in a man's game, surrounded by money, women, and people who smiled too easily. He was offered champagne before he learned to drive. He tasted fame before he learned its cost. By 15, he was using heroin. A woman twice his age handed him the needle at a New Year's Eve party, the kind of party where everyone laughed too loud to hear a warning. He said later, "I just wanted to feel like they did free." But freedom, for him, came tied to a spoon and a match. The group broke apart quietly. No farewell concert, no goodbye. Just 5 kids walking in different directions after a year and a half that had already changed the world. Frankie went solo not because he wanted to, but because the men in suits told him that's where the money was. He was making $5,000 a week, yet couldn't afford his own happiness. The more he sang about love, the less he felt it. His voice deepened, his fame faded. By 16, the boy who once danced with white girls on national television was now singing in half-empty clubs. His eyes a little darker each night. He had everything the world promised, and yet nothing he could keep. Fame had given him wings, but no one told him how heavy they would be. By the time the spotlight dimmed, Frankie was still only 17. The crowds were gone. The tour buses stopped coming. The same world that once chased his smile now crossed the street to avoid him. He tried to grow into the man everyone already thought he was. He wore tailored suits, carried cigarettes he didn't really like, and learned how to order whiskey just to sound older. But behind the charm, behind the grin that once lit up television screens, there was a boy who still needed a mother, not another deal, not another drink. Heroin became the only thing that didn't leave him. At first, it was a whisper, a way to sleep, a way to quiet the noise. Then it became the noise itself. He pawned clothes, watches, instruments, even his own publishing rights. For $1,500, he sold the songs that made him immortal to Morris Levy, the same man who'd owned his childhood. $1,500. For eternity. By 20, his name had slipped from the radio. The same people who'd once called him the future of music now called him a liability. He performed in nightclubs, sometimes for food, sometimes for a fix. Once, he sang, "Why Do Fools Fall in Love?" in a bar so small you could hear the bartender counting tips. They said his voice cracked on the final line, not from age, but from everything he'd lost. He married 3 times, each one trying to save him from himself. Elizabeth Waters, a woman older than him, gave birth to his only child, a baby girl who died 2 days later. Zola Taylor, the glamorous singer from the Platters, tried to love him, but love can't compete with addiction. Their house went into foreclosure after he stole from her to buy dope. And then there was Amira Eagle, a schoolteacher from Georgia, the one who saw the broken man behind the myth. She believed in redemption. So did he for a little while. In the army, stationed in Georgia, he stayed clean for 2 years. He sang in church again. He wrote letters home about second chances. People said he smiled differently, like a man who finally heard God's voice again. But the industry never forgets its ghosts. When a call came from his old manager, promising him a comeback record, Frankie couldn't resist. He packed his bags, kissed his wife goodbye, and went back to New York, the same city that made him and killed him. The 27th of February, 1968. Frankie was found on the floor of his grandmother's bathroom in Harlem, a syringe beside his arm. He was 25. Some said it was an accident. Some whispered it was murder, that the men who owned his music wanted him silenced before he reclaimed it. Others said it didn't matter, because long before that night, Frankie had already been dying slowly, quietly, one note at a time. He sang about love before he ever knew what it was. And when love finally came for him, it came too late. Death didn't end the story. It only changed the key. When Frankie Lymon's body was laid to rest in the Bronx, there was no grand funeral, no orchestra, no industry crowd, just a few family members, a wooden box, and silence. For years, his grave had no headstone. No one to say, "Here lies the boy who made the world fall in love." But ghosts don't fade that easily. Every time a radio played "Why Do Fools Fall in Love?", his voice floated through living rooms again, sharp, innocent, eternal. To a new generation, he was just a sound. To those who remembered, he was a wound that never healed. The fight over his name began almost as soon as the dirt settled. 3 women, Elizabeth, Zola, and Amira, each claimed to be Mrs. Frankie Lymon. It wasn't just about love. It was about the money he never lived to touch, royalties, rights, and recognition. And behind them, in the shadows, still pulling the strings, was Morris Levy, the man who'd once bought Frankie's music like a cheap trinket. In 1981, Diana Ross covered Why Do Fools Fall in Love? And suddenly, the world remembered. The song climbed the charts again, 25 years after the boy who wrote it had died. That hit reopened every wound and every lawsuit. Old bandmates came forward. Old contracts resurfaced. But when the court finally ruled, it wasn't the friends who built the dream who got paid. It was Levy and Amira Eagle, Frankie's last wife, who stood as his legal widow. The others, Jimmy Merchant, Herman Santiago, the only surviving teenagers, got nothing. Not even credit for the song that made history. Because in America, especially back then, paper meant more than pain. Still, time has its own kind of justice. Years later, Levy was convicted of extortion, the same greed that had built his empire now dragging it down. And Frankie's music, stripped from him in life, slowly returned in spirit. In 1993, Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Boys too. Men stood on stage to honor them. 4 men bowing to 5 forgotten kids who started it all. In 1998, Hollywood told his story in Why Do Fools Fall in Love, a film about fame, love, and lies. Millions watched, cried, and said his name again. That mattered, because remembering is its own form of resurrection. Decades after his death, a fan named Ronnie Italiano raised money for Frankie's headstone. He said, "Every legend deserves a name in stone." And when the marker was finally placed, Harlem breathed a little easier. Frankie was only 25 when he died, but in truth, he never aged. He still lives in every young black voice, brave enough to sing its heart out, no matter who's listening. He was the first to show that our stories, our voices could fill the world. And maybe that's enough, because some stars burn too bright to last. But even when they fall, the sky never forgets where they've been.